once I found out about your book, Adrien, you know, and Yvette told me that she actually had a copy. The only thing I was disappointed was that I could not order one online and have it delivered to my house. So, but other than that, I have been burning up a lot of cell phone time actually reading, and these photos are awesome. So everyone, I want to introduce Adrien Badot, and he is actually the author of the Aurora Chase. And this is just a little snapshot of what he's done. I know he's got a podcast, and, he's on Facebook, and he's on Clubhouse, and he's got this following. But for us today, he's going to reserve his time just for us so we can ask all of the questions that we want. Because after all, we are a special audience. So you have the floor, Adrien. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm very good. Thank you for having me, Karen, and to take some of your time to actually host this this panel. It's really awesome, and Yvette as well. And thank you so much to everyone who's on stage and who's listening. Yeah, so my name is Adrien, and I am a French professional astrophotographer and cinematographer. I now live exclusively in Norway, so I haven't lived in France for quite a while, actually. It's been 10 or 15 years. I've lived in Canada, so I finished my studies in Canada, and after that, I traveled to Denmark, back to Europe in Denmark, where I taught high school for about 5 years. And this is actually, I think we're going to go back to that in a minute, but this is where I found my passion for the Aurora, and that's what got me into the realm of photography, and that's how I made photography my full-time profession, basically. So I'm super thrilled to be presenting my book, The Aurora Chase, which is now about a year old, actually. But it's been, quite a long project that I had in mind to be able to present something that has not been done extensively before in that format, something that people can take with them on a chase or in the field, and check, if they're not sure about something, then check, where can I find this type of resource? Oh, quick check on the book, and that's right there. So that was like a big project that's finally come to fruition, and now I'm super thrilled to present it to you today. And Karen and Yvette, I cannot thank you enough to take the time to do so.
Well, thank you, Adrien. I mean, like I say, I was so hyped up after I read that book. Because one of the things that really intrigued me is that I did do a little bit of a photography class. And when we start talking about f-stops and, shutter speeds and all of those different things, I was able to follow right along. And even the way you explain things in the book, as far as from the novice all the way up to the highly professional guys, I think that is really, the greatness of this book, that anyone can pick it up and say, hey, I want to do this. And you have taken them step by step from novice all the way to professional. And, it's really awesome in that way. Tell us again where you are, because I think the people on here are going to be really intrigued of where you are and in relation to what we're talking about.
Okay, so just before I answer your question, I just put, for those of you who haven't found the book yet or are willing to download the book, I put that in the chat, in the chat section on the side here. So I just put the link. So, but to answer your question, so I am living now in northern Norway, but this is not only like the north, like way up there, it's actually about 200 miles, actually a bit more than 200 miles up above the Arctic Circle. So I'm within the Arctic Circle, and I'm at 70 degrees of latitude north, and I'm in the highest in terms of latitude big town on Earth, which is Tromsø, and that we call it the capital of the Arctic, basically. And I'm right below the aurora. Basically, if my sky is clear, I see the aurora almost every night.
Oh my
So
goodness.
yeah, it's just the right place to really enjoy the aurora. It's just right there, and it doesn't need a lot of input from the sun. And I think we can go back to that in later in the presentation. But we don't need a lot of activity from the sun to have aurora. It just appears like that. So I can. I do consider myself quite fortunate to be living in such a very nice environment. I'm in the fjord. Like I wish I could show you my view. Well, not right now because we're having a storm. But I wish, yeah, I have the view over the fjords. It's just if you've seen the movie Frozen, the cartoon, that's exactly that. The almost out of a fairy tale. It's just like that. So I'm really thrilled.
How did you get started with something like this? What was the spark?
So, so if I go back to the little story I was starting earlier, right after my studies, I finished my master's degree in Canada. I traveled back to at that time France because obviously I'm from France, sorry, and I was looking for a job at that point in relation to my master's degree. Unfortunately, that was when the economical crisis happened. So in the field that I was in, there wasn't a lot of jobs or openings. So I was looking around and I found this teaching position, which was supposedly going to be only momentary in Denmark because we had a few friends in Denmark, and I just found this position. So I just traveled to Denmark with only like a little suitcase, and then started this substitute teacher position. And after maybe 2 or 3 years, the one of the teachers who was my colleague at the school, he used to spend his time outside because he was the cadet teacher there, and so he was doing training at night, in the hills, especially also on the beach towards the north and everything. And I remember one day we were in the teacher's room and we were talking about the aurora. I just don't know how, but we came to talk about the aurora. I told him, that's my biggest dream to go and see the aurora. But unfortunately, the teacher's schedule didn't really allow me to travel that much. So he said to me that day, well, Adrien, you can see the aurora from Denmark if you're lucky enough and patient enough. I was like, no, you must be kidding me. I mean, when you think about the aurora, you always think about a very wild Arctic location, like you have to travel way up north to like Alaska, Canada, Iceland, Norway. But like Denmark is not that much. So that sounded really funny and silly to me. So one night that the auroral activity was actually very high or forecast to be very high, he told me, well, Adrien, tonight's the night, so you should go take your chance on the beach and wait there for a few hours and see if you catch something. So I took him up on his word and drove to the beach, waited, I don't know, maybe like 5 hours. And I was just exhausted, just waiting in the cold, very windy that night. And I was actually turning back towards to go back to my car. And the tree line in front of me just lit up out of nowhere. And I did not know what it was. And I was, what is it? Is it like the moon? Is it a boat? Is it a car? But realizing that cannot be any of those things, I turned back, look, instinctively turned back, and I saw on the northern horizon. I was still close to the beach, so on the northern horizon, these dancing pillars, and I was floored. Like my jaw, I had to pick up my jaw. I was on the ground. I was in awe. I was it's undescribable. It's something when you see it for the first time, I think it's just um, you can't speak. It's just just renders you speechless. And so I stayed there for maybe 15 minutes, which was the duration of the show. I took in every sort of every second and all the light. That it wasn't very colorful because it was very low on the horizon, but just the amount of light coming up from that aurora, lighting up the otherwise very dark landscape was just mesmerizing. And so I think that did it for me. That's what really sparked the interest. I mean, now I crossed something off my bucket list, but I don't know, it just sparked something in me. And the next day, I don't know why, I just wanted to capture it, to come back to that beach and try and capture the aurora. So I actually picked up my first camera off of Amazon, which is probably not that good, but um,
Mhm.
picked up my first camera, went to the beach the second night, and I took my first not very good picture of the aurora. But yeah, that's what basically started
Yeah.
my interest in that.
Hmm. Well, I was just leading up to gonna lead up to what it is that you just mentioned, because to get that money shot, a lot of times you have to take 100 photos to get that one. So and change cameras and everything else. So how long did it take you from, hey, getting that camera on Amazon to realizing what equipment you had to get, and hey, here's this money shot that I can literally put up on a screen and sign my name to? How long did it take you to get from there to that point?
That's an excellent question, and that's something that I usually tell the some of the few clients that I have on my workshops is that if you're not willing to put out the work and get out
Hmm.
there with your camera, no matter what sort of equipment you have or skill level that you have, if you're not going, getting out there and just take photos, no matter what, try different settings, different locations, different orientations. Just try. And but I mean that's the same for a lot of fields in life and a lot of things in life. You just have to try and get better little by little, make a lot of mistakes. And I think, looking back at it, I think I don't know, I've taken maybe like thousands upon thousands of pictures. And
Hmm.
the first year, honestly, my pictures were not that good, and they were not that spectacular, or none of them had really like the wow effect. And
Hmm.
it took me approximately 2 to 3 years, I would say, to really sort of master the settings, be comfortable with my camera, the gear that I had, enough at least to say, okay, now I can look to upgrade my gear. Now I have enough knowledge. I know what works, what doesn't. I'm ready to sort of take the photography further, take a step up and upgrade. But yeah, it does take a lot of practice, tons of hours watching tutorials on YouTube and
Hmm.
being by myself in the cold. Whenever people go to sleep, I would, go out with my camera and do the opposite of what's natural and go to bed, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, the importance of good photography is so understated. When you meet astronauts, when they're going up on a mission, one of the big things that NASA literally turns them into photographers, because there are the eyes up there that can actually show the world what's happening on the ground, and with us being able to get a really bird's eye view of Inspiration 4, who just launched and came back safely, you can see that, there was a lot of photography going on, and people were depending on that four-person crew to take some cool photographs, because without those photos, it's like you weren't even there. So I
Mhm.
think more than ever, especially with the audience that we have on today, and even for people who are just now thinking about space because they may have thought that, well, I could never be an astronaut because I'm not Neil Armstrong. And now, based on what happened within the past week, where, all of us, including all the people who joined Project Possum and want to learn a lot more about noctilucent clouds and everything else, we know now that we can play a part in this. And that's why what you're doing, is so, so very important, because it has always played a role in all of the stargazing and everything else. But the awareness of what's going on above us now and how the industry has been commercialized, I think that a lot more people will have an interest in what it is that you're doing and what you have to say. So are you opening up your doors or planning on doing more media or expanding your platform to reach folks? If not for people who want to become a part of Project Possum, or just to make more people interested in what you're doing as far as photography in the world above us?
Yes, and I think you just touched on something very important here is photography is taking, I mean, I've seen photography take, you know, the interest in photography soar basically in the last years, and a lot of people are getting more comfortable livelihoods overall, I think, and they have access to more and more cameras. And I feel like photography, whether it is, photojournalism or like science photography or just like to show art, I think it has such an importance in our everyday lives. It is what, for me at least, it is to try and show the world what there is at night, when people are not, because nighttime is not it's not usually people's comfort zone in a way. I mean, it's dark,
Mhm.
we're not nocturnal animals, basically. So my goal is really to make people aware of the different phenomena that happen at night. And I think there's a huge potential because, as you mentioned, there a few of these phenomena, we're just starting to scratch the surface, science-wise at least. Like you were mentioning noctilucent clouds, for example.
Yes.
And actually, if it wasn't for Jason, who saw my work on Facebook a few years ago, I would never be part of Project Possum and probably would never have heard about Project Possum. So it's so important for me to put my work out there so that, to raise awareness about these phenomena, and also the different sort of institutions and projects that there are out there, at least for science, for science sake in a way, because there's just so much we don't know, whether it is about the aurora, noctilucent clouds. I was thinking about sprites, red sprites,
Mhm. Rights. Yeah.
atmospheric phenomena. So many things we don't know that much about just yet. And I think photography has a lot to bring to the table in these fields. So yes, it's definitely so. Show my work for sure, but it's more of an incentive also for more people to pick up a camera and get out there
Mhm.
and shoot. Because I've seen in the recent years, I've seen the power of citizen science. Um, what we can gather in terms of data is just phenomenal. Just with a little camera, it's just absolutely phenomenal.
Yes.
And with the rise of social media now, it's even better. We can gather and collect data on a mass scale, and that can help science in a major way, I think.
Well, going through your book, caught my attention about the do's and don'ts. Can you share one of the biggest do's and share one of the biggest don'ts that you want to quickly share with the group?
All right, so we're talking about aurora chasing, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the biggest do when you go aurora chasing, I would say, I would say it's twofold. The first thing you need to remember is to try and if it's something like you want to cross off your bucket list, you've never seen the aurora and you want to maximize your chances to see the aurora, I know those travels can be expensive, and obviously the further north you're gonna go, the more expensive it's gonna get, because most of the things that you buy, the cost of life, everything has to be imported basically. So everything is very costly. So I know that demands a lot of resources from people, but try to put all the chances on your side by going at least a week if you can, because also cold means condensation and thus clouds. And so if you really don't want to miss out on 1, 2, 3 nights, being completely overcast, then go for several days at least. So at least 7 days I would recommend, because the more days you're staying, the more chances you have to at least find a little opening in the clouds and get to see the aurora. And the second thing is to be patient. The aurora is a very elusive and very varying phenomenon, and sometimes it just doesn't show itself for hours in a row, and then all of a sudden it just bursts in colors and brightness within seconds. So it's very important to be patient.
Okay.
Now the biggest don't.
The biggest don't. Yes.
Yeah, I think it just it's logically connected to what I just said. Don't go to bed early. And I think that's the major mistake a lot of people make. Seeing like a faint aurora in the sky and saying, "Hey, I'm done for the night. I'm tired, and this is it. Like, this is all I'm gonna see." No, this is most likely not what you're gonna see the whole night, because the aurora can get, in a matter of seconds, like I just mentioned, can get from 0 to 100. I mean, it can get literally from you not being able to see around you, so very, very faint aurora. You don't even see colors with the naked eye. It's a very faint sort of band, almost the same brightness as the Milky Way, if you've ever seen the Milky Way in the dark sky, to brighter than the full moon. I mean, it's just crazy bright. So be patient and don't go to bed at 10 in the evening, because yeah, most of the aurora happens around midnight most of the time. So there you go. I think that's the biggest do's and don'ts, if I have to recap.
Well, I think people should really be paying attention to that, because patience pays. I keep hearing you say that you have to show up prepared to hang out for the long haul, and not just think that you can walk up and it's going to just appear. You just have to hunker down and wait for it to happen. So switching gears a little bit, someone is asking a question about the climate, and I know that I'm going to be asking you a question also. What can the aurora teach us about climate? Is it interrelated in any way, the two?
So to try and summarize with a very concise answer, there hasn't been any proven evidence as of yet in the literature of an influence or a correlation of the aurora with lower atmosphere phenomena. And I mean, by lower atmosphere, I mean much lower atmosphere, at least the troposphere, so up to 7 miles up, right? I know there is some science being conducted as we speak to try and assess any potential correlation between a bit higher altitude phenomena like noctilucent clouds or blue jets or red sprites with the aurora and with air glow and everything that happens in the ionosphere, basically. So I know there's a bit of science, maybe a lot of science, being done at the moment, but so far I don't think there is any sort of correlation that has been proven between terrestrial weather, at least, and the aurora, which happens much higher in the atmosphere.
Meaning, can we say that this whole phenomena about global warming um, wouldn't be affected, the aurora and all of that? Wouldn't there be no correlation between both of them?
There may be some, and I'm taking this with forceps. We have this expression in French saying take that with forceps because it's quite a touchy subject, and I don't pretend to know enough. Obviously,
Yeah.
I'm not a scientist, so I think there might be some indirect consequences because as the climate changes, obviously the constitution of the atmosphere will probably change as well. And so the chemical reactions within the atmosphere will definitely change as well. So as the aurora highly depends on the layers and the composition of the upper atmosphere, basically, we have nitrogen, oxygen mainly. Then if these vary, then that will definitely have an impact on how we see the aurora and how we see the colors of the aurora, especially.
Okay.
So we might expect actually some changes and some correlations. We just probably don't know it yet because this will be very indirect. You know, the aurora is mostly an electromagnetic phenomenon. So so far, I don't think climate change is affecting the magnetism around the Earth. Maybe I'm making a mistake here, but yeah, composition-wise, I think that we might have some indirect implications in the future.
Okay. All right. At this point, I want to transition out of just the one-on-one questions. I know that you may have a small presentation that you wanted to show the group. Do you want to do that, or are you open for questions right now?
I let's see. I have my book open. I mean, I have a presentation that I usually give to people who take my classes, but this is very centered on the book in a way, and it goes into detail a lot. And I really, we only have a limited time, so.
Okay.
What we can do is I can take maybe 2 minutes to sort of go through the book very quickly, how it's structured, and maybe what is contained within the book, and then maybe I
Yes.
can take the one-on-one questions, if that's okay with you.
Yes, sure. Go right ahead. Thank
All
you.
right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen if I can. Now comes there we go. Right. All right, can you all see my screen now?
We can. Yes. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'm just going to go and so the book that we present today is an iBook. So that's an ebook for Apple devices. I'm working currently on releasing a version for Android tablets and phones. So it's in the making, and I'm also working on a paperback version, but transforming these all these charts and diagrams and videos into text, it takes a lot of time because the goal of the book was to be very interactive, very sort of innovative. So the book works with a color code, and beside the titles, you will have the green, the orange, and the red dots, and those will tell you the green is for like very basic, very general knowledge. Orange is slightly more advanced. It's still very essential, but it's sort of a bit more advanced. And red is even a bit more technical. It's for people who really want to dive into the technicality of, for example, reading solar data and everything. So everything is color coded, and I think it makes it clearer to everyone. So the book is structured into 3 chapters. The first one is getting to know the aurora. It's basically explaining what is an aurora, where it comes from. So what is an aurora, where it comes from, the sun. It's explaining the different features of the sun, whether we talk about solar flares, coronal mass ejections, coronal holes, active regions, anything that happens on the surface of the sun and in the outer layer of the atmosphere called the corona, because it has a big influence on the aurora on Earth, believe it or not. So this is what we present here, the sun cycle. I present a lot on what's happening between the sun and the Earth, because I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions, around how the aurora is created, and these events happening on the sun, and they have to travel through space. People think space is an empty space, but it's not. And a lot of those things happening on the sun, launching storms, solar storms, particles, it will just go through like this, and it's just not the case. And this is what makes aurora prediction so difficult, even for scientists. So this is what I present here. Then I quickly present how the aurora is created from the sun to Earth, what happens to those particles emanating from the sun, and how they end up in the Earth's atmosphere. So you can click on those figures and basically scroll through and see step by step how they're created. There we go. Explain a bit more about satellite pictures of the aurora. I know we just touched on satellite and how science is evolving at a very high pace in this regard. But I just like looking at the aurora from space must be such an amazing experience. I mean, that would be, for me, that would be the dream. So yes. Then I talk about when something is arriving at Earth, how Earth is reacting to those things that the sun spews at us, basically. And this is the geomagnetic activity. So I dive into detail with the geomagnetic activity scale. Then I talk about geomagnetic latitude and longitude. And one fun fact about this is that for the same geographic latitude, you see the aurora much further south in the US than you would in Europe. That's a fact that not a lot of people know. But if you're located, for example, in, let's say, the Great Lakes area, then you would see the aurora much like you would see it in southern Norway in Europe. And you have a difference of geographic latitude of, I think it's about 10 degrees, which is enormous, because you can see here the geomagnetic north is tilted towards North America. It doesn't follow, the aurora doesn't follow the pole, the geographic pole, it follows the geomagnetic pole. So those are a lot of fun facts that you should definitely be aware of when you go aurora chasing, because they can determine whether or not you see the aurora, basically. Right? Then I dive into the monitoring and forecasting of the aurora, which has a lot to it. I dive into a lot of the satellites, the different satellites, and why they're important. And then I dive into the different things that you should read. If you download an app, for example, the different charts that you have, what do they mean, how you should read them, because everything is more like it's a micmac. It's a big world out there, and unfortunately there are a lot of people downloading these apps, and they go in the field and they read the graphs wrong, and they end up not seeing the aurora and being disappointed. And there's a lot more to the aurora than just reading the graph. So I dive into those in detail here. And I go over step by step what resources you should use and where you should find them. So everything is in here. You can just click on those interactive figures and basically get, the links to all the cool scientists and forecasters in the field. The second chapter is experiencing the aurora in the field. So we go over the shapes, the different shapes of the aurora, the colors of the aurora, and what they mean, how you can see the aurora with the naked eye, for example, how our naked eye see the aurora versus the camera, what is true and what is wrong. People saying you cannot see the colors with the naked eye are definitely mistaken because you can on some occasions. So yes, also auroral behavior, because like I mentioned in the introduction earlier, the aurora highly varies, especially at very high latitudes. So how to sort of predict the aurora, knowing more about its behavior, basically. So I go over this, and then, whoops, oops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, guys. It looks like the book quit on me, so I'm just gonna unshare my screen, and then the last chapter basically deals with photographing the aurora and filming the aurora. So what camera should I use? What lens should I use? What other gear? The settings, getting the composition right, and all those types of stuff. So I hope that I didn't take much of time and try to be concise, but this is what you can find in the book, and there are tons of resources, links, videos, interactive figures. So this is like very sort of new. This is not your regular paperback book. So this is why I've been working for a year almost on that book, and I'm so thrilled to finally have released it.
It is definitely a fabulous book. I can't wait for the hard copy to come out, but it's just unbelievable as I was going through the photos. Sometimes we're afraid to ask questions because we don't want to seem too dumb, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. Is the aurora visible at all times? It's just that we can't see it all the time?
Yes. So there is always some auroral activity, whether we cannot pick it up with our eyes because it's just too faint, or the sun is in the sky at this time of the day or the night. Here during the summertime, it's the midnight sun. So unfortunately, the sun occupies the northern horizon for the whole night, and the sun overpowers the aurora. Unfortunately, outshines the aurora. So we just cannot see it. But there is always at all time a little stream of particles sort of being channeled over the poles at very high latitudes. So at least there's always this little activity. And then on some occasions, we get an enhancement in this activity. And this is when we see the gorgeous auroras,
Okay.
that yeah.
Okay, all righty. Okay, thank you so much. Well, now I want to open the microphones to anyone who wants to ask a question.
All right, let's
So
do it.
just unmute yourself if you want to ask Adrien a question.
Yes, please go ahead, guys. If anyone wants to ask a question.
Yeah, Adrien, hi, this is Michael. A question for you.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, technical question for the photography stuff. I've seen a lot of, and I imagine you have something like this in the book too. I've seen a lot of aurora photographs where there's been a subject in the foreground that's lit well against the dark sky with the aurora, a person or some trees or something like that. I'm absolutely terrible at anything to do with front lighting, and I was wondering if you could give a tip on how you keep your skies dark, your auroras vibrant, but having a nice exposure for the person in front.
Right. It is very, and actually I'm sure I can find a picture that I've taken. I'm just going to share my screen again real quick, if you don't mind. So there we go. I'm just going to move that to the side. In the last few days, we've had the moon here behaves in a very weird way in the Arctic. we don't see the moon at all, like it's not in the sky at all for 15 days of the month. And then for 15 days, it's always in the sky, which doesn't happen further down towards the equator. And the moon is an excellent, helper in that lighting up the foreground. But I have to agree with you that sometimes either the aurora is very faint, and then you have to bump up the exposure and get, to get the foreground nicely lit up. But sometimes you have a strong aurora, and you're in a place that's really, really dark, and that's super challenging to get the correct exposure on the sky. The aurora is, the light from the aurora is almost burning your highlights, and versus you have your foreground is extremely dark. So I don't have like a miracle recipe for that. I'm just going to show you a picture that I took at the start of the season. If I can find it, of course. Yes. So I don't know if you can see this picture.
Yeah.
It's taken with the Canon 6D, which has not the best dynamic range in the world, actually one of the worst, but it has a very good ability to handle high ISOs and noise. But as you can tell, the aurora is almost, the highlights from the aurora is almost clipped. You can almost lose details here in the very bright areas of the aurora, versus here in the foreground, it was so dark that you can even see the noise, and it's not really detailed, and it was so hard for me to sort of pull out the details in the photograph. I would suggest, if I were you, I know maybe it's not the best advice, but try to find, if you have this type of situation, try to find a foreground that at least has some elements of that are brighter. And I wanted to show you this. Same sort of aurora that was last week. Same sort of aurora, quite bright at some point. That's quite low activity for us. It might seem very wow, but for us, that's quite low activity. But see here in the foreground, I have a lake that reflects the light of the aurora. I have grass. I have a bit brighter meadows. So that definitely helps light up more the foreground. But I know it's challenging, and I realize not all cameras are equal at handling the light and the noise, the signal foreground. So I do realize that.
Okay.
Try to use
Very good
as well. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Do we have anyone else wanting to chime in and to ask a question, maybe?
Adrien, how are you? I just wanted to see if you had any recommendations as far as spots in Iceland that you think might be the best place to hopefully catch some glimpse of the auroras next week or 2 weeks from now.
Oh, wow. Sure, for sure. I've been to Iceland about, was it 3 or 4 times? But the first time I was quite oblivious to this simple fact that, and unfortunately not a lot of tourists realize that with Iceland. I mean, they do realize because they see it, but they don't make the connection with the weather, and that's volcanism. And that's something that we don't have anywhere else, basically, where we have to see the aurora. We don't have this I don't think they have that in Alaska. I might be wrong, but I don't think like in the Fairbanks area, I don't think they have that. We definitely don't have volcanism here in Norway. And that plays a major role in determining the low cloud cover in Iceland. And I was not aware of that the first time I traveled to Iceland, and I found myself sort of scrambling around Iceland, traveling 500 kilometers during the day to try and find clear skies, and I ended up having this one hour for like 10 days. It just rained out a window one night. It rained the whole time. Don't need to be aware of. Try to get away from that southwest Iceland, sort of like where everyone stays, unfortunately, in that golden circle. That's where a lot of the volcanoes are, and it's producing, even if they're not active, it's producing a lot of lower clouds, which hinder your view on the aurora, basically. So if you're going to Iceland, I definitely, now is a very, very good time because they benefit from a lot of anti-cyclonic conditions at this time of year. They have a few storms, and we're starting to get the storms. Unfortunately, the tail end from hurricanes are coming to Iceland, and then after that to Norway. So, sometimes we have periods of time with, unfortunately, bad weather, but you have to be ready to chase clear skies in Iceland. That's the best advice I can give you. If you're renting a car, then fill it up during the day, and then go somewhere I'm going to point you actually to that website, which is absolutely awesome. I think it's verdur.is, and it's basically the oops. I'm just going to put this in the chat right now. That's the link to the weather or the best. Oh, what am I? Okay, this link is terrible. I'm sorry. Let me just point you to the.
Very impressive.
Oh wow! I've never seen a link that bad. I'm so sorry. Let me just try and. But yeah, so please visit that site. It has a very nice forecast for the 3 layers. So lower clouds, middle atmospheric clouds, and then higher clouds. And then it combines this in this chart, and it's absolutely, it's very nice and it's very precise. And so try to find places where obviously you won't have a lot of cloud cover. I don't have any rules in terms of like microclimates and where. I don't think there's any best place, because Iceland is it's basically swept by those storms. So I think you're definitely going to be having some weather at some point. But I could recommend the Highlands if you still have the possibility to sort of rent a car, a 4x4, and then go into the Highlands, because I know that the mountains sort of block at least the lower clouds. So I know northeast Iceland has a slightly better weather there because of that. So I think that's about the only thing I can give you right now. Let me just put that in the chat. There you go. I hope that works. All right.
Hey, does anyone have any other questions for Adrien?
Hello, Adrien. This is Juan Carlos. I just wanted to ask you about the effects of the aurora, and you were mentioning any reaction from the animals around you. Do they behave in a specific way? Are they aware of the auroras? Any experience you have on that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Juan Carlos. That's an excellent question, and that's one that we get a lot here when I guide people around the aurora. Not that I've seen myself, to be honest. I was the caretaker of a reindeer I was a few years back. I was working at what's called the Aurora Borealis Observatory, which is only 3 hours away from here, and they had a resident reindeer, and I was its caretaker, and I don't think I've seen any particular change in behavior of that reindeer during that time. I know that they're definitely sensitive. Their eyes are definitely sensitive to pick up those wavelengths that the aurora has. But I think they can definitely see the light, and on some occasions when the aurora is brighter, they might it might be easier for them to get around and find food and try to like forage. But I haven't seen any particular behavior in terms of even like pets, for example. I haven't seen many pets or cats or dogs, under the aurora, but I'm not actually not sure. Research is being conducted at the moment. I know research is being conducted on the effect of the aurora on or potential effect of the aurora on bioluminescence, which is a phenomenon that happens in the water, or mostly in the water, I should say, with planktons and mollusks that glow in the dark. Basically, they're trying to see if the glow from the aurora is actually having any sort of effect on the mechanisms behind the bioluminescence. So that's definitely super interesting. But as far as I know, I'm not sure about the general sort of effect of the aurora on wildlife. So yeah, sorry if I if I couldn't answer that, but I
That's
haven't
great.
heard
Thank
of.
you.
Yeah. All right.
I'll pipe in with a question here. Adrien, good to see you again. And
Hi, Aaron.
I was late, so I apologize if you already answered this. But I'm not an astrophotographer, but I have seen photos of before and after Starlink. So I'm just wondering how much of an issue that is, and how do astrophotographers sort of deal with sort of all those streaks that are now appearing. Maybe not just Starlink, but maybe in the future it might get worse with other companies. If you can just comment on that if you haven't already. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It's good to see you. I hope you're well, by the way. So I think that's a very very interesting topic, and I was actually discussing it. I was in one of those rooms, room, sorry, on Clubhouse with Yvette. Actually, I think I just can't seem to remember the name of that scientist who was talking back then. That was a few months ago, and we talked about the effect of satellites on us and back on Earth, but especially astrophotographers. I think it's making we're unanimous, I think, in saying that it has mostly a negative effect on how we view the night sky and how we take the pictures. And especially me, I have so what I'm doing mostly now is, of course, I do tours, Aurora tours and workshops and whatnot. But I also take a lot of content that I license to production companies to be used in documentaries and stuff like that. So time lapse is taking a photograph is, I guess, I wouldn't say easier, but it's you have the power of easily removing any sort of object in the sky that you don't want now with tools like Photoshop or Lightroom or all the tools that are available to us now. But for film, it's much more complicated. When you take a time lapse, so a series of pictures, if that satellite is going to move across the frame, across maybe 25 to, I don't know, 50 frames, you're going to have either to, remove it at the source when you're post-processing your pictures on each and every 50 frames that you have, or try and sort of like crop out in post-process when you have the film ready. So either way, it's very complicated. And more now, I think last year was the first time I actually saw the train of satellite from SpaceX, the Starlink satellites, and my first reaction was not a good one. I'm not going to repeat what I said, but it wasn't a good one. Fortunately, they're making efforts to sort of dim out the light. They're applying some special coating on the satellites to sort of dim out the reflection, the reflectance from the sun. These satellites are also only visible, in a certain time slot from sunset to nighttime. But after a while, they become not visible because they don't catch sunlight. But in countries like us, where the sun lingers under the horizon for so long, you know, the course of the sun for us is very gentle, as opposed to at the equator, it's very steep. And so the satellites become invisible basically very fast. For us, you know, the satellites are, I mean, right now we see satellites all night. The sky is just covered in satellite. And actually, I can show you quickly. I was just editing some time lapse today. I think I can share my screen if you're interested, and you're gonna see that. Let me see if I can find my time lapse, maybe a random time lapse, to just to show you the number of satellites now that are present in the sky and that you can see on 4K time lapse. Let me see if I can find. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Let me see if I can do that. There we go. And I'm going to try and pull a time lapse from. Let me see if I can find one that is. Yeah, let's try this one to show you. I hope you can all see the screen.
Yeah.
That's taken right in the middle of the night, which would be our local midnight. So that's potentially where, you know, when the satellites would be the least visible. But we're also at the time of the year where the sun is still quite high under the horizon, if that makes sense. So a lot of the satellites will still catch the sunlight. So I'm going to play once the time lapse, so you can see it's quite beautiful. Just look at all these streaks in the sky. A few of them are shooting stars, but most of them are satellites. Just see how busy. I know the aurora is beautiful, and I know you might be looking at the aurora, but just look at just how many small streaks there are in the sky. I mean, all these that you see right there, you know, all at once. I mean, we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes up to 10 satellites at once. So it is definitely becoming an issue. And I know it might seem petty for us or for like the general population, because we're so, you know, I mean, what is, I think that was one of Elon Musk's tweets a year ago, like, oh, like astronomers and astrophotographers, like what is the percentage of them in the general population, you know? But ultimately, I think that's still a question that should be raised, and you know, the discussion should be had, because, well, yeah, we're such a small percentage of the population, but we're all enjoying or trying to enjoy the night sky. And unfortunately, between satellites and light pollution, fewer and fewer people are actually able to see these beautiful things, and that's just like masking the night sky. I mean, who in your friends, who is able to tell you, I've seen the Milky Way in my life now, right? I know a lot of my friends say, wow, is this actually what you can see with the naked eye? Yes, it's actually what you can see with the naked eye. And they have no idea. So I think the discussion should definitely be had, and measures should definitely be taken in how we tackle this satellite problem. And I wouldn't say it's a problem. I might sound very negative because I don't want to sound negative. But I think it's, you know, with the dawn of satellite technology and the advancement of the launch of more and more satellites into orbit, I think that's definitely something that we should be more aware of, how that's going to impact our lives in the future and the lives of our kids and the future generations, because now we're fortunate enough to still be able to have these resources available to us if we're able to travel. But maybe in the future, we might be looking at a sky that is completely filled with a network of satellites that are here to stay, you know, not moving. We're not going to be able to take any sort of pictures or time lapse of the sky without having any sort of human elements in it. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for your perspective on that.
You're welcome.
Hi, Adrien. Yeah, I wanted to know, I know that you do classes, you said, in person, and I saw through the book. By the way, the book is perfect for someone like me who does not pick up a camera that often. It was easy for my level, and I'm a novice, so thank you for that. Do you offer virtual photography training or courses right now? And if you do, how can we sign up?
Yes, I do. Everything is available on my website, which I will pin to the top here. Basically, I offer every day any sort of one-on-one, or it can be a group if people want to, if they feel more secure with other people, then I can definitely accommodate that. It's over Zoom. It's mostly one-on-one, like I said, and it's I think I have during the day I have several slots available. I try to be time zone friendly so that people all over the world can join. So I have from 10 a.m. my time to 8 p.m. my time, which should cover most of the spectrum of time zones. So I'm gonna try and find my the link to those workshops right now, and it's anyone can join. There's no real skill set that you should have. It's for all levels. That can be on how to post process the pictures, but that can also be like a sort of a prep workshop, like how to prepare for photography and how to set up the camera and everything. Everything can be done remotely nowadays with the COVID situation, unfortunately. So yeah, I just put the link in the chat. So yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else with any other questions? But there is a question here in the chat. I believe it's from Aaron, and it says, does the color of the aurora change a lot depending on some geographical point where it's observed from?
Yes and no. I wish I could tell you a very concise and easy answer, but I would, generally speaking, no. Like your location, I should say actually your longitude does not play a role. When you're gonna rotate into nighttime, you're not gonna have the same aurora as the ones that have rotated outside of nighttime, obviously, because the aurora always changes. But you will potentially have the same show and the same colors. So it just depends on the activity at the moment that you're viewing the aurora, but your geographic longitude does not play a role. Your geographic latitude now might play a role because there are different factors on how you can see the aurora, and the prime factor is how far away you are from the aurora. For example, people in the States, in the upper states, on many occasions actually they can see the aurora. On when the activity picks up a little bit, then you can see the aurora as pillars or an arch on the horizon. Pardon me. So they're quite distant from the aurora, and thus they can see the whole spectrum of the aurora from top to bottom, basically, from the bottom green to then you have the red or the magenta, and then sometimes you have the blue color. So versus if I'm looking at the aurora, if it's right above me, then the green, which is what's at the bottom, the green and the pink, will be sort of overpowering. That will be on top of the magenta and the blue. So I will have much more difficulties actually making out those colors. Sometimes it just you find like holes and you can see the colors, but it just depends on your latitude, I think. But mostly, I think what's modulating that the colors is the altitude of the aurora and the intensity at which the particles from the sun shoot in, punch through the upper atmosphere and bump into the different atoms and molecules of the atmosphere. So if they penetrate really far down and if they have a lot of force, then they will most likely produce a very vibrant pink and green, because they will reach down to height of 80 kilometers, which is where most of the molecular nitrogen can be found. And above that, unfortunately, molecular nitrogen is very rare. So they will sort of, depending on the activity and how powerful, how much energy those particles, mostly electrons, have, they will sort of have different effects on atoms and molecules. But now I guess we're entering the realm of quantum physics, which I'm by no means an expert in. So I just have a general understanding of that. So, but that's I think that's a general answer to that color question, I think.
Well, thank you, Adrien. I think we've gotten to mostly all of the questions. There's a last question here about, now that the sun is in a more active cycle, what differences in colors and latitudes can we expect?
That's a very good question. Okay, so my chasing career started in 2015. So I've gone through, I started at solar maximum, and 2019 was solar minimum. For those of you who don't know what solar maximum and solar minimum is or are, basically the sun has cycles of activity of, on average, is about 11 years. And it goes from minimum to maximum. Minimum being there's not a lot of activity on the surface of the sun. We don't have a lot of sunspots, active regions, and things that can basically launch solar storms at us. And maximum, where we have when you look at a picture of the disk of the sun with this double belt of active regions, they look very impressive, actually. And those can potentially launch solar storms. And this is a very active sun. And this is what we are transitioning towards now. Solar minimum was in 2019, and it was a very quiet time for Aurora chasers. So most Aurora chasers needed to travel to very high latitudes to be able to see the Aurora, because when you don't get those solar storms, the Aurora doesn't reach down to lower latitudes, right? So now we're definitely transitioning towards solar maximum, which is I think it's, yeah, they're saying it's going to be about 2024 2025. It's expected to be, pardon me. So I think we're expecting, I'm definitely seeing now, in the last year, I can tell you, I can already see a major change in how we view the Aurora here at high latitude. I see definitely more colors, especially when we're getting hit by those CMEs, those coronal mass ejections, aka solar storms. They're not very powerful just yet, but I can tell you we got many more colors than what we used to have in 2019, for example, where we can have like bright auroras, but it's just not the same. And now that we're getting towards solar maximum, we're going to get more and more auroras being visible at even lower latitudes. So everyone living, for example, in the central states or southern Canada, the upper states, even in, I would say, at latitudes like the UK, Belgium, those, I wouldn't say southern latitudes because for us it's southern, but I would say further down towards the equator, they should definitely expect having more and more of these big solar storms where they can see Aurora with the naked eyes, the big red pillars and the very impressive shows. I think we're going to get more of those in the next years.
Okay. All right. Well, if there are no more questions from anyone, Do you have any final words for us, Adrien?
Oh, do I have any? Yeah. So if the aurora is such an amazing phenomenon. I mean, we have aurora in fairy tales and children's books, and it's just something that we always sort of dream about or see in pictures. But and we have high on our bucket list. I think a lot of people have that on their bucket list, and they never either don't have the resources or don't find the time. But really, it's even better than what I can possibly tell you it is. The experiencing the aurora in person is such a life-changing experience, that you should do it. Do it. I know it's high on your bucket list, but please take the time. Try and find the resources to go and experience your first Northern Lights, because it will definitely change the view that you have on the world. It's a very humbling experience because it just puts you back in the perspective of you being so small and the aurora being so big. When you look at those huge pillars extending into space, almost being, the a bridge between you and space. It's not because of nothing that the Vikings called the aurora the Bifrost. This transition bridge between the Earth and space. So it is tremendous, and it needs to be experienced at least once in your life. So please go and chase the aurora, and hopefully pick up my book and learn a thing or two about the aurora. And good luck. Yeah, that's the final words.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time today, Adrien.